In today's video I will show you how I painted the leather cape that Abaddon the Despoiler has been wearing for 10,000 years and how to make it properly old and sinister looking.
Hey guys, I'm Zoltan and you're watching Balance Miniatures. Sometimes you just want to paint a nice luxurious red cape, but today is not that day. Today I will show you how you can paint a dark and beaten up leather cape that has suffered a lot of damage over millennia, but without making it look bleached and boring.
So without any further ado, let's do it.
I'll start from a black primer since I want this cape to be dark and moody, so it is easier to build up the highlights from there. The first color I will be using is Darkness from Kimera Colors. This color will give us a nice colorful shadow since it has some purple in it, and also the name kinda suits Abaddon. I will paint this all over the cape except the deepest shadows. It is a transparent color, so over black I need quite a few layers to achieve full coverage. But that suits me just fine, since this way I can have 1-2 layers touching the deepest shadows without fully covering them. But I make sure to cover 90-95% of the surface until it's fully opaque. The next color will be a 50-50 mix of Darkness plus Dark Honey from Kimera. Dark Honey is a beautiful dark golden brown color, and I'm mixing it with the Darkness because it will be slightly too bright for me on its own. I don't want it to stand out too much from the previous layer, so I combine the two so they blend together easier. I will be using this mix to mark all the light areas. Before I started painting, I decided that the light will be hitting Abaddon and therefore the cape from above and slightly from his left, so I will take this into consideration when I paint in my lights. I make sure to not only paint the upper part of the folds, but everywhere I think the light would hit, so also in between the two folds. Painting only the upper curve is a mistake that is too easy to make, but the bottom curve would also be hit by the light if it shines from above. And just like before, I use multiple layers until I achieve full opacity, especially in the middle of the highlights. I am not very precise with this. Leather is quite irregular as a material. It has a lot of blemishes, different color patches and stuff like that. So there is no need to be super neat. In fact, I intentionally want to be somewhat random since it will add to the effect later. Now I can switch to pure dark honey since it won't stand out as much from the previous layer as if I painted it over the darkness immediately. But now I'm entering into a territory where I need to be slightly more precise, since from now on I want to be able to paint with little lines, dots and scratches to create some texture. So I switched to a brush with a very sharp tip. It doesn't need to be small, but it needs to be sharp. Instead of continuous color patches, I am painting with lots of scratchy lines to create some texture on the cape where I want the lines to be. In the very middle of the highlight I will block in the color fully with some thicker paint, but at the edges I let the lines extend into the previous layer. This color is quite transparent again, so the lines don't stand out too much from the background, and wherever I feel they do, I can use 1-2 thinner layers to glaze over them and integrate them better. With this color I will also start painting all the edges, both on the edge of the cape and the edges of the holes inside the cape. Alright, everything so far was to create the base for the next step, where I will start to do some proper highlights. And for this I will use Kiwi Brown from Kimera, and you will notice that this color is much brighter than the previous one and it stands out quite a bit from the rest, but don't worry, I need that brightness so I can do the next step, but for now let's just concentrate on the highlights. I will use similar brush strokes as in the previous step, but smaller and thinner inside the previous highlight, and once again I will cover the middle of them fully with some additional layers. But this time I will also create a lot of irregular texture around the highlight in the previous layers. I create small dots and scratches close to the border of the new highlight and less as I move away towards the darker areas. Then I make some passes over the texture I created with thinned down Kiwi Brown, dragging it towards the highlight, integrating everything together. But it will still look a bit too bright, which is fine, since now it's time for the secret sauce that will fix this and do a lot more besides. First, I will be using transparent burnt umber ink through the airbrush, but this step can also be done with the brush. The thing about leather is that it is usually somewhat glossy, or at least satin, and because I'm using Kimera colors, so far everything was quite matte. Inks tend to produce a satin or glossy finish, and they are also quite transparent, which I increase further by thinning them down in the airbrush. This way I can use them to create a satin finish on the cape, as well as to integrate my texture further together. And on top of all that, I can also use them to add some additional hues onto the cape, making it more interesting and realistic looking at the same time. I will spray this ink inside the shadows and on the border of my Kiwi Brown highlights, where I painted the dots and the scratches. Due to the transparency, I can paint lots of layers before the color becomes too strong, and I can control how dark and colorful I want any given spot to be. Next, I mix some purple and black ink to produce a really dark purple color and do the same as before, but concentrate it into the deepest shadows and at the bottom of the cape. The purple darkens the shadows further, producing more contrast, but also adds another interesting hue onto the model. When I am done with the ink phase, I use Kiwi Brown again to correct any overspray I might have done on the highlights and re-establish them. We are getting quite close to the end result at this point, only some more highlighting to do. I mix in some bone khaki into the Kiwi Brown and do the same as before with the pure Kiwi, but this time I use only small dots and scratches in the middle of the previous highlights. I will also do the edge highlights again with this color, but only where the light would hit them the most. For example, I would mark the bottom of a hole, but not the top, since the light is shining from above and would reflect on the bottom edge. Once again, I do some glazing with the same color, but only a couple of passes since I want to use an ink again, but this time with the brush for more control. Then I take raw sienna and slightly thin it down. I paint it over the boundary between the new and the previous highlights. This helps integrate the last set of highlights and add even more color onto the cape. Finally, I paint some pure bone khaki only on some corners and edges in the highest highlights, just some stippled dots and scratches. And with that, the cape is finished and the end result looks like this. In one of the upcoming videos, I plan to show you how I painted Abaddon himself, but in the meantime, here is a quick look to see how the cape looks on the finished model.
That's it for today. I hope you guys found it useful, and if you did, consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel. We are getting really close to 10k subscribers, and it would mean a lot to me if we reached it in the next month or so. See you guys in the next one.